Hello, good afternoon. My name's Gideon Sylvester, and I'm the United Synagogue's Israel Rabbi. This afternoon, our lunchtime shiur is called The Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. And it's a shiur in memory of my father, Sam Sylvester Shmuel Ben Tzvi, who passed away 10 years ago on Sunday. If you take a look at the picture, kind of fittingly, it's a picture from an 18th century painting of the Chevra Kadisha at work, and it hangs in the Prague Jewish Museum. As you can see, there's someone who's passed away on the couch. He's surrounded by men who are looking after the body. And in the left-hand side of the picture, you can see a woman and a little boy grieving for the man who's passed away. It's an image which sadly in modern dress we're all too familiar with, because it's been a very hard year, a year in which we've lost so many very beloved members of our community, friends and family. When it comes to mourning the dead, we face a question about truth. And it's this. In this week's Parasha, we're told in source 1, which you can see coming up onto your screens now, that there's a mitzvah of Dvar Torah. Keep away from anything that remotely smells of falsehood. The Parasha tells us in his commentary, keep away from anyone that you know who spreads lies, who's dishonest, who gossips, who says things which aren't appropriate. It's one of the principles on which the world stands, according to the Mishnah in Avot. As you can see here in source 3, Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, the world stands on 3 things: al-hadin, al-ha'emet, al-hashalom. It stands on law, on truth, and on peace. The problem is that sometimes those different characteristics collide. Sometimes, if we try to make peace, we'll find that we have to compromise a little bit on truth. If we want a just resolution to a dispute between 2 people, well, one of them might be annoyed by the result, and therefore we can't have peace. And what we're looking at today is we're looking at the question of how do we balance those different characteristics, truth and peace and justice. And that's the question which I want to ask about the hesped, about the eulogy, the words that we say after someone's passed away. Let's turn to the Shulchan Aruch, Yoredea, which discusses the mitzvah to speak about someone who's passed away. Mitzvah gedolah, laspid al hamet karawi. It's a great mitzvah to speak, to eulogize the dead appropriately. And that mitzvah has to be fulfilled as well as we can. And when we fulfill it, we should always make sure that we don't just speak in generalities and say, he was a very nice man, a very good man, a very kind man. We should tell stories and anecdotes and try to bring the memories of that person before all who are standing at that funeral, or in our days, perhaps watching it on Zoom. ומצוותו שירים קולו לומר עליו דברים המשבירים את הלב. And the rabbis say the mitzvah is to raise and to say things that break people's hearts, כדי להרבות בבכי ולהזכיר שבחו, in order to increase the amount of crying and in order to recount the praise of the person who's passed away. Interestingly, in Talmudic times and in some communities here in Israel still, eulogies are very, very emotional things. It's not like the English stiff upper lip. The point of the eulogy, says the Talmud, is the tears that it caused. The rabbis felt it was appropriate to remember someone, to remember them fully, and to allow the emotion that we all feel when someone passes away to come out. Now, here's our question. You're not allowed to exaggerate too much the praises of that person. But you are allowed good deeds, their good characteristics, and to add a little bit. Rak shelo yaflig, but don't go overboard. Ve'im lo hayu bo midot tovot klal lo yazkir alav. If the person didn't have any good deeds to their name, well, just keep quiet, don't say anything. V'hacham v'chasid mazkirim lahem chochmatam v'chasidatam. And if the person was a scholar or a righteous person, you should mention wisdom and their righteousness. But anybody who speaks well about someone who had none of these characteristics, or anyone who goes overboard in praising the person who's passed away, causes evil to themselves and to the person who's passed away, to the deceased. In other words, the rabbis felt that we should speak about the person, we should speak nicely about the person, but not go overboard, because that kind of spotlights the areas of their inadequacy. But we learned at the beginning of our shiur that it's forbidden not just to lie, but to do anything that is remotely dishonest. Midvar sheker terchak. So the rabbis in their commentaries on the Shabbat struggle to understand, why should it be permitted to exaggerate? Why should it be permitted to say things about the deceased which aren't necessarily true? It's bad to lie at any time, and at the solemn time of a funeral, that must be worse than anything. So, the Taz was the person who really approached this. The Taz, Rabbi David Halevi Segel, who lived from 1586 to 1667 and had to flee the Chmielnicki massacres, who lost 2 sons in the Chmielnicki massacres, but famously published a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, on Yerideh, called the Turei Zahav, the columns of gold, and that's why his commentaries, he's known as the Taz. And he looked into our question. He asked, why should it be that if it's forbidden to lie, that it's permitted to exaggerate at a funeral? And this is what he said. He said, first of all, we don't see anybody 24/7. Even the people that we're closest to, even our family members, we don't know what they're doing all the time. And therefore, it's reasonable to assume that the person who passed away probably did a lot of good deeds that we are completely unaware of. And therefore, our hesped for such a person, we have to make an allowance for the fact that maybe there were some good deeds that we didn't know about. The second reason that he says we're allowed to exaggerate at a funeral is because most people try to be good. They want to be good. And the problem is that sometimes things get in their way. I remember once at a practical rabbinics class being told that at Mincha, before Shabbat, we always say, Salach lanu avinu ki chatanu, God forgive us because we've sinned. And that sin is very often the phone calls we meant to make before Shabbat. The people who are unwell, the people who are in need of a boost that we wanted to call and we wanted to support, but we didn't quite get round to it. And most of us have those good intentions, and this person probably did too. And we should kind of take account of their good intentions and understand that they were probably a better person than we realized. The third thing is that when we do good deeds to other people, when we help and support other people, when we are supportive of our community, it makes a huge impression. But sometimes we're not aware of just how much of an impression a kind word here and there can make. And probably this person wasn't aware either. Had they been aware, they would have done even more because they really wanted to be good. And that too is a reason to not scrounge on their praise. And the final reason that the Taz gives is he says that if we were told that it's forbidden to exaggerate at all the good deeds of a person who's passed away, then religious people will get nervous because that's their nature. And they would be so concerned not to exaggerate the good deeds of the person, well, they would end up speaking a little bit less nicely about that person. They'd end up contracting their praise just to make sure they didn't overstep the mark. And that would not be a good thing, says the Taz. And therefore, says the Taz, the rabbis say to us, don't worry. You're allowed to exaggerate a little bit. If you go a tiny bit overboard, it's okay. Just don't try to be stingy in your praise, in your final words to someone that you loved. So what the Taz has given us is a series of reasons as to why, when speaking at a funeral or speaking at a shiva, we can allow ourselves a little bit of wiggle room in terms of our praise of the deceased. But wiggle room is one thing. What about when we're in a situation where we're simply confronted with something where telling the truth is very awkward indeed? And the rabbis gave us a test case. They said, supposing you go to a wedding where it's a mitzvah to help the bride and groom celebrate, where it's a mitzvah to say lovely things to them and make them happy on their wedding day. It's a mitzvah to tell the bride she's beautiful, but supposing she's not, what do you do then? And that's the test case for truth-telling that's found in the Gemara in Ketubot, Daf Tet Zayin Amud Bet. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, Keitzad Merakdim Lifnei Hakala. How do you dance in front of the bride? Many of you will be familiar with those words because they're a popular wedding tune. Keitzad Merakdim Lifnei Hakala. Keitzad Merakdim Lifnei Hakala. But when we sing them to wedding, we don't really realize that it's part of a major philosophical discussion about the nature of truth. So, Keitzad Merakdim Lifnei Hakala. Beit Shammai says, Kala kamotchehi. Says Beit Shammai, say it as it is. If she's not beautiful, well, what can we do? That sounds very harsh. That sounds very harsh indeed. And the Tosafot, the commentary of the Tosafot, which is found in the Talmud, they were the grandchildren of Rashi, well, they kind of soften it a little bit for us. And they say, actually, you're not going to say it as it is. Don't say, you look ugly, because that might not go down so well. But just don't say anything at all. Or if you need to say something, well, find something that you can praise. So look at the bride and say, your earrings are very nice. Or something like that. Bet Hillel, one little bit. Bet Hillel omrim kala na'eh v'chasuda. Bet Hillel say, no, you say to every single bride that she is fair and attractive. And Beit Hillel say, Beit Shammai, what you're saying just doesn't work. Because if you praise one specific aspect of the bride, everybody is going to know that really what you're saying is everything else looks really bad, and it's just those earrings that are good. So Beit Hillel say, have a little bit of sensitivity. And they use a very interesting kind of parable to explain their case. They say, supposing someone went shopping and they bought an object. Do you know what? I haven't been scrolling down. I'm sorry. There's the main part of the Gemara. Beit Shammai say, Beit Hillel say, supposing someone went shopping and it was very precious to them. And they're excited about it. And they came home and they showed it to you. And they said, isn't this really lovely? You don't turn to them and say, nah, you could have bought it cheaper somewhere else. Or, there's a better version somewhere else. That would be wrong. That would be harsh. That would be cruel. Which is, I think, a very decent argument. Beit Shammai turn to Beit Hillel and say, hang on a minute. You say that, but the rabbis can't tell people that they should lie. That would be the wrong thing to do. But the conclusion of the Gemara, I think, is very beautiful, and you can see it here. Be'olam tehei da'ato shel adam mu'urevet im habriot. A person should always behave in a way that's acceptable, that's fitting with the people around them. Part of being a Jew is knowing how to conduct yourself in a way that's sensitive and thoughtful to the people around you. My teacher, Rav Amitel, used to emphasize that to us tremendously. First of all, he did not want his yeshiva students to be showy in their religion. He wanted us to be able to fit in with the people around us. He told us that we should always be normali in Hebrew, be normal, act in a normal way, don't act in a showy religious way. And the second thing he always told us was that we had to be sensitive to the people around us. And he used to tell it to us through a lovely Hasidic story, the story of Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin, who went to visit his Rebbe, Rav Yisrael of Apta. Rav Moshe of Kobrin went to visit his Rebbe because he wanted to see how he got ready for Shabbat. Because among the Hasidim, in particular, seeing how your rabbi behaves is even better than reading how to behave in a book. It's exemplary. And therefore, Rav Moshe of Kobrin goes to see Rav Yisrael of Apta. He comes to the house just before Shabbat. He sees Rav Yisrael of Apta get everything ready for Shabbat and make his way to Shul. The Rebbe sits in Shul, and with great devotion, he reads Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, that very spiritual, beautiful poem of love between God and his people and God. And the rabbi is immersed in this gorgeous connecting God, when suddenly the doors of the shul swing open. A horrible stench enters the Bet Midrash, and a farmer walks in. The farmer rushes up to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, my cow is sick. The Rebbe looks up from his prayers. He turns to the man and he says, what's the matter with your cow? Please tell me, please explain. The farmer explains what's wrong with his cow. The Rebbe recommends a vet, and the man, much calmed, leaves the shul. Rav Moshe of Kobrin was shocked. He was used to rabbis who dealt with holy books. He was used to rabbis who dealt with difficult halachic questions. He was used to rabbis who immersed in spirituality. And here's Rav Yisrael of Apta dealing with stinking cows. And Rav Moshe of Kobrin turned and said, what in the world is going on? Why are you spending your time dealing with sick cows? Is that really what you're a rabbi for? And Rav Yisrael of Apta said, you don't understand, my son. When the man came to me to talk about his cow, he wasn't just talking about his cow. There was a message that lay underneath all of that. And that was, I'm someone who's troubled. I'm someone who's in pain. Someone who needs support and love and kindness. And so often, when people speak out about one thing, beneath it, there's another message. Beneath it, there's a request for empathy and for love and for sensitivity. And that's what Rav Yisrael of Apta taught Rav Moshe of Kobrin. And that's what Rav Amital taught us. That one must make sure that one's behavior always fits in as well as possible with the people. And that's really the message of our next Gemara, which is a very sweet one. Because look, here it is in Eruvin, Daf Nun Gimel, Amud Bet, and it says, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina said, Pam achat nitarachti etzel achsanya achat astani pulin. I once went and stayed in this inn where the hostess made for me beans. B'yom Rishon achaltim v'lo shi'arti mehen klum. On the first day, I ate them all, and I didn't leave anything over. Shni'ah lo shi'arti mehen klum. The second day, exactly the same. I didn't leave anything over. B'yom shlishi hikdichatan b'melach kivan sheta'amti machshachti yadai mehen. The third day, she put way too much salt in. And as soon as I tasted them, I just had to put my cutlery down because they were inedible. Amrani Rebbe mipnei ma'in chasoed. The woman turned to me and she said, Rabbi, I made you this wonderful beans. Why aren't you eating them? Amarti la kva sa'aditi mibod yom. So I told a little white lie. I said to her, Madam, I'm so sorry, but today I actually ate earlier and therefore I haven't got room. I'm too full to eat your very delicious beans. And that's the message of Rav Moshe of Kobrin and Rav Yisrael Apta and of my teacher, Rabbi Amital, that sometimes a white lie is appropriate if it's going to prevent someone's feelings from being deeply hurt. Let's turn to our next source, source 7. Here, we find ourselves in a horrible domestic conflict, a much more difficult situation. It's the story of Rav, and according to the Gemara, he had a difficult marriage. Rav was tormented by his wife. Perhaps they'd been in lockdown for too long. If he asked her for lentils, she prepared him peas, and if he asked her for peas, she prepared him lentils. Things were really hard in that house. When his son Rav Chia grew up, he always reported the opposite of his father's instructions. So Rav Chia finds a way to get out of these fights. He very simply reverses whatever it is that his father wants. His mother, hearing the reverse of what his father wants, reverses that and dinner that he wants. And it seems that everyone's happy. Says Rav to his son, "Your mother's improved." "No, I simply reversed your instruction to her," explained Chia. Chia says this wasn't such a difficult problem to solve. But Rav was not satisfied. He said, "You can't do this. You think I'm a fool? You think I never worked out that I could have reversed what it was that I wanted for dinner? But there's also a mitzvah of telling the truth, and I have to tell the truth." So what's interesting is that up till now, all the examples that we've seen have been examples about bending the truth just a little bit to spare someone else's feelings. But how about when it's your own feelings? And here we see that Rav was much more strict. When his own feelings were at stake, he was strict, and he didn't in any way compromise the truth. And that again is the theme of the next Gemara, which is from Makot, Daf Kaf Daled Amud Aleph. The Gemara Makot says, "V'doveh emet bilvavo kugon Rav Safra." It's taken a verse from the book of Tehillim. In the book of Tehillim, there's a beautiful description of who it is that deserves to stand before God. And it lists a whole set of characteristics of good people who are generous, who are blameless, and do righteous acts. And then it says, "V'doveh emet bilvavo." It says a person who speaks the truth always. And the Gemara's comment on that is kugon Rav Safra. The Gemara just says, like Rav Safra. As often in the Gemara, it doesn't tell us the full story. So we have to rely on the commentary of Rashi for help. Rashi, as my teacher Rabbi Gideon used to say, is your best Rebbe. He's the rabbi who takes us by the hand and walks us through the situation and helps us understand what's going on. And here you can see in source 9, Rashi's commentary on the Gemara. Says Rashi, Rabbi Safra, this is the story of Rav Safra. He once had an object to sell, and someone approached him while he was reciting the Shema. So there he is in shul saying the Shema, and someone comes up to him and says, "Sell me the object for such and such a price." Rav Safra doesn't reply. And the person who wants to buy the object thinks, maybe I haven't quoted a high enough price. So he increases his offer. This time, Rav Safra is still saying his Shema. So again, he doesn't answer. When Rav Safra finishes his Shema, the man now is ready to do the deal. Rav Safra is ready to do the deal. And Rav Safra might have turned to himself and said, "You know what? I was saying the Shema, and because I was doing that wonderful mitzvah, the price went up and I'm going to make more money." But that's not what Rav Safra does. He does the opposite. Says Rav Safra, "Amar lo tol hachafetz b'damim she'amarta b'rishona." Please take the object for the amount of money that you initially quoted to me. Shabbat damim hayadati litnam lecha. That's what I always intended. That's the price that I always intended to take from you. So please don't give me any more than that. And what we see is that Rav Safra is very honest. And when it's his profit that he would lose out on by bending the truth a little bit and pretending that he really was ready to do that, he says, "You give me just the amount of money that you first quoted, because that's what I always intended to take from you. And here we turn to our final Gemara, one of the sources that tells us that what he did and what all of these rabbis have done is the right thing. Amar Rabbi Elai b'shem Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon mutar lo la'adam l'shanot b'davar hashalom shene'emar avicha tziva v'chulei. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Elai said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, it's permitted to sometimes depart from the truth in a manner that will bring peace. As it says, your father commanded us before he died, saying, so shall you say to Joseph, please pardon your brother's crimes. Remember, in the story of Joseph and his brothers, they had an easy relationship. The brothers plot to murder Joseph. Joseph escapes to Egypt. He's sold into slavery in Egypt. He becomes the head of Egypt, the ruler of Egypt. The brothers come to him. They have to beg for food. And eventually, everyone is reconciled. But it's not quite clear whether the reconciliation is for real. Or is it just that Joseph's behaving nicely while his father's alive, and that once he's buried, Joseph will take out his revenge on the brothers? So the brothers make up a story, and they claim that their father passed on a message that Joseph must forgive them and treat them well, even after Jacob has died. The story the brothers make up isn't true. It's a lie. But it's a lie that's told in order to create peace. It's a lie that's told in order to create harmony in the community. And that's really been our theme for today, because we know that amongst our heroes is Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the priest, who used to go from couple to couple, from business partner to business partner, whenever he saw them having an argument. And to each one he'd say, you know what? You know that your husband or your wife or your partner wants peace, wants to make up your fight. It wasn't necessarily true, but it brought together. And in those circumstances, Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the priest, thought that it was right to tell a white lie to make peace. At all other times, Aaron was very straight about the truth and very careful not to bend it, twist it, or turn it. As Jews, we have a very strong law that says to us, not just don't lie, but midvar sheker tirchak, keep well away from anything that is remotely dishonest. And that should be the principle by which we live our lives. But on the odd occasion, if we find ourselves in lockdown, if we find ourselves in a place of conflict, and we can bring harmony to our family, to the people around us, to our communities, and it just involves a very small white lie, when in such circumstances, it might be permitted. I hope that none of you need recourse to a white lie. I hope that we can all go into our Shabbat in harmony and in peace, however difficult the current circumstances of a lockdown. And I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.